His party is about the heteronormative family. Women's brains are not as good at doing analytical work as men's. They should stay at home and have babies who should be Christian, and no Roma need apply. He has personal close ties to legionaries who are the fascists in Romania. This far-right party won, I think, at least twice as many as last time when they ran elections, which means people support them. This is not some, BS coming from the Russians or the Chinese, or it's not just that. Romania has not had a strong left-wing party or people who want to follow them ever.
Today, I'm joined by Maria Bucur-Deckard, who is a Romanian-American historian and a professor at Indiana University. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really glad to know that there's enough interest out there about Romanian politics so I can offer my thoughts about it.
There's definitely a growing amount of interest, as on May 18th, we're going to have a second round of presidential election where we have a centrist candidate running against a far-right candidate, George Simonian. And if you could just share a little bit more about what is taking place in Romanian political landscape right now.
Of course. So Romania had a presidential election last year in November. There was one round of elections. Another far-right candidate who's now been supplanted by Simeon Călin Georgescu won that first round, followed by a woman, Lena Lasconi, who's representing a party called the Union Saves Romania. And it was a shock, but not a shock. Like, Călin Georgescu was somebody relatively unknown to most people. There was a bit of scratching of the head, when the results came out. A little bit of a freak out because his platform was not just right wing, but he has used words. So he's performed in terms of his presentation, in terms of his references, the fascists of the interwar period, very directly. And he has personal close ties to mercenaries who self-identify as legionaries who are the fascists in Romania. So that was a huge shock. The other shock was that basically you had people who had never heard of him, and the guy said that he spent $0 or euros on his campaign. Millions of TikTok moments that were celebrating him and all that. And so people started wondering what was going on, right? I can come back and say more about it, but basically after that first round, there was a kind of stepping back. The Romanian president called in the Council for Security. They looked at the intelligence that they had about these sources, the TikTok sources, and they realized that there had been basically dark money flowing to influencers on TikTok from a variety of offshore places that are connected to both Russia and China.
So it was $0, €0, as he said, but it was a lot of rubles and yuans.
There's a lot of rubles, of course. And there was also misrepresentation. There were influencers who later on, more recently, have come out and said, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was paying, getting paid for. People were getting paid, 10,000 euros, 100,000 euros, depending on how much they were participating in this. But it basically created this huge campaign and profile for this guy on social media. And the issue was, of course, that if you didn't declare any kind of money for the campaign, but you use money that somebody else, secondhand was giving to these influencers, you're basically lying about your campaign contributions and how you're running the campaign, right? So this is the background to, first of all, there was supposed to be a second round in Romania, just the framework of how elections work, right? If a candidate in the presidential doesn't get more than 50%, there's a runoff. He got, if I remember correctly, about 35%, and the second, had something about 20%. There's a pretty large margin between them, but nobody got the majority vote. And so when the president stepped in and this information started to come forward about the intelligence, they took the issue of the second round of elections. Like, are we going to have a second round with this candidate who lied about, how he was running his campaign, where his money was coming from, as well as the basic issue of foreign interference, which is a constitutional kind of crisis issue for, well, any state, including the United States. And so they took it to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court made a decision that basically, given the fact that there was false information being provided to the Bureau of Elections, in Romania, that the second round would be canceled because there was lying in, official documents, and that they would, restart the electoral process. The president stayed in power, passed his welcome. He was not popular whatsoever. He decided, I don't know for what reasons, I'm not his, conscience, that he was going to stay on until the next elections. There was a huge blowback because of that. He is a member of the Liberal Party coalition. So the Liberal Party basically told him, "You got to go. You're creating noise here that is not useful to us, basically electorally." So another fellow from the National Liberal Party became president. Actually, he's, in my view, a very decent person.
Yuri Bolozhan.
Bolozhan, yeah, Igor
Yes.
Bolozhan. Bolozhan is a guy that, I mean, I have not read a lot on him, but he strikes me as being much more transparent in what he says and how he says, and kind of according his actions with his with his words. And so this guy became interim president. In the meantime, there are also parliamentary elections. So you had presidential elections that were put on the back burner until they could figure out this mess and restart them, right? And then on the other hand, you had parliamentary elections, which returned a huge mess. It made it very clear that it wasn't just about the far right guy being held by TikTok. That in fact his party, the party that he's he was supposed to be independent, but he's part of this AUR, which means gold in Romania, in Romanian. It's a party that I'll say a bit more about it, but it's far right basically. This far right party won significant number of I think at least twice as many as last time when they ran elections, which means people support them. This is not some, BS coming from the Russians or the Chinese, or it's not just that. There's other things going on. There are now at least 3 far-right parties in the Romanian parliament. Together, they do not have the majority, but they have a strong minority. In order for the parliament to function under a government, this is the system of government in Romania is like the one in France. You have the president has more ceremonial power, but he has to appoint and also approve the government when it comes to power. The government is made up of the prime minister and his or her cabinet, and they're elected from the elected members of the Senate and the House. And basically, it's proportional representation based on how many votes each party gets, right? So of course you don't have the 2 parties. You have like the 20 parties. Of those 20 parties, 3 parties have been in power since the beginning of post 1989 democracy in Romania. And I bring this up because it's really important. This is the kind of, to me as a historian, a big part of the context, right? So the National Liberal Party is a party that activated in the interwar period. Actually, it's from the late 19th century, basically. They have represented themselves as being the people who really hold up the values of democracy, capitalism, private enterprise, individual rights, etc., etc. Right?
They were pretty central from what I'm
They're
understanding.
right wing. No, that's okay. Just okay. There are no center and left wing parties in Romania to just come to the chase. To cut
Okay.
the chase. So the other party is called Social Democrat. The only social democrats that are really social democrats existed in Romania in the 1920s and have not existed in Romania since then. for 100 years. Romania has not had a strong left-wing party or people who want to follow them ever. The communists were never a democratic party. And when they came to power in 1947, they had the meetings in Russian. Just to explain what we're talking about. The Russian army was there. They were present in the room. People were talking not in Romanian with each other, but in Russian. So this was by no means a social justice party in the way that social democracy developed in Europe since the 19th century, right? It had the name communist, but no. And so when the Social Democrats were created as a party in 1990, it was as a kind of a combination of the apparatchiks that had existed before 1989, were young, ambitious, had access to information because of the secret police, could really bring down any enemy they wanted. Right? Plus other young enthusiasts who, some of them actually believe in social democracy. I don't want to take down social democracy. I want to say that there's a combination here of people who are very corrupt, very much interested in maintaining power and nothing else, through populist means, and through providing benefits that also speak to social justice from people who actually believe in that. Right? The cost of doing business this way is that it's corrupted the notion of social justice in Romania. I know that there are young people, because I teach and I work with them and I celebrate them, who, go to the streets and have been in the streets since the November days in the first round of elections, speaking to, pro-democracy, pro-Europe, etc. But the Social Democratic Party does not represent them really. So so you have these two parties, and then the third party is the Democratic Union of Hungarians in Romania. The Democratic Union of Hungarians in Romania is about 5%, which is the same percentage as the population of Hungarians in Romania. So it's a party that votes on the basis, in principle, of the interest of minoritized group, right? That has a lot of education, that are present in certain areas where they really control local elections and businesses, etc., right? That have a neighbor next door that is very interested in relations with these people. But at the same time, the Democratic Union of Hungarians has been the kingmaker of every single election. Because you cannot have a government without having a majority. The Social Democrats and the Liberals have never reached 50% together.
Okay.
They've always needed that 5% from the Democratic Union of Hungarians. These three parties have pretty much been in power since 1990. They know each other. They work well with each other. They're married with each other. They have businesses together. It is, I'm just going to put it out there, basically a mafia.
Okay.
There's not much interest in any of these parties to reform anything. The Hungarians have other issues to deal with because Orban's in Hungary. He's got his own issues. I'll come back to it. So they're a bit more flexible in relation to the interest of the Hungarian state and Hungarian citizens, right? The other two parties, basically, they figure out who their, I don't want to say constituents, their clients are. And they change with each other like every election. Oh, okay, you give me this, I give you that. But I mean, basically, the reason people in Romania are fed up with these two parties is because of the reason I just gave you.
The faces
The
change.
corruption.
No real.
Look, when it comes to auctions for whatever funding from the government, these two parties and the representatives and the in-laws and the cousins and the, whatever, goddaughters and godchildren always get what is necessary for that place to keep running under that particular party, right? It's not about merit. It's not about value. It's not about competency. Some of these people are competent, actually. But the problem is that on the global level, as a voter, you look at these parties and you're like, there's nobody to vote with. So in those presidential elections, in November last year, right, the candidates of the Social Democrats and the Liberals, which are the two largest parties in Romania, got under 10%. Right? So this is bankruptcy, like political bankruptcy. It's a moment of crisis. You should realize that things need to change. What has the government done since they've been reappointed? So the government is still Social Democrats, Liberals, and Hungarian Union, right? Of these three, the Social Democrats, again, try to run the same candidate in their presidential. Well, there's actually, sorry, this time in the first election that just happened a week ago, they came together with the National Liberals. They ran a guy who just was like, it was silly. He hasn't had any kind of public presence forever. He's not a forceful person. He was just kind of a marionette, right? A little puppet that they put up there, and he looks nice and whatever, but, no home, no energy. He just got destroyed. He got destroyed, and I can't even, there's like under 10% that he got this time, right? So they're clearly ranked up. Between that election and this election, it was time to make some big changes, such as, cut some of the government spending, try to bring in like more investors, try to raise the trust of the population in politics.
Just some background. I think Romania, it's suggested for the EU countries to run a government deficit of under 3%. Romania has been running much bigger government deficit at about 7+%.
Right. So they're trying to bring that down to 3%. Exactly. First they came up with, we're just gonna cut, thousands of positions. We're gonna reduce these special pensions. There are government employees, especially in the military and the police, that get basically a pension that might be even higher than their salary on the basis of how the legislation's put together.
I feel like that's a Soviet legacy. I think there were all of these coveted positions.
Yes. Anywho, so of course that means that, they think that they're winning supporters among those people. Turns out the military and the cops are full of far-right fascists. So even the populist kind of move of we're going to keep throwing money at you is not working, because in the last 6 months, they've had to say, we're going to cut back on some of this. So they overplayed their hand in terms of the populist sort of support that they were seeking, because now they have to pull it back to not really drive Romania over the cliff of this debt, right? People are even more dissatisfied. So this is Romania since November until basically last week, where so the guy who was running last November, due to the fact that he lied in the official documentation about running the election, was disqualified.
Is that a democratic decision in your opinion? Because I think in the US there's this entire outcry that now all these like liberals in the West are trying to suppress any right-wing vote. To me, it seems like a democratic process, but also wanted to hear your kind of final conclusion on that.
Right. So the kind of outcry you're talking about is coming from a South African Afrikaans white nationalist called Elon Musk. He believes that if you don't really bow before the fascists like the AfD or our in Romania, you're not being democratic. Well, good luck to you. I really don't care about his opinions regarding Romania. In Romania, what happened with the invalidation of this guy's candidacy, it was very clear. He lied about the amount of money that he was spending and where it was coming from. And that's just clear. So the constitutional decision in November was not very clearly spelled out. The problem there was one of communication, I think, more than anything else, right? But when the guy reapplied, he had to go to the Bureau of Elections. And the Bureau of Elections looked at his declaration about how much money he spent. Then they pulled out fiscal, findings that they had from basically intelligence, organizations, and said, no. The answer is no. He wasn't the only person disqualified, is the other thing I want to say. There were like 20 protests against different candidates regarding, how they went about applying. So he's not the only person who was disqualified also, right? There's no process. He also went to the European Court of Human Rights to talk about, undemocratic, anti-constitutional sort of work by the Bureau of Elections and the Constitutional Court. They looked at it and they were like, no, a European Court of Human Rights is not a woke place. They have sided with Russia on like cases that I cannot even believe, but it's basically what the law says and what kind of documentation they have access to. So they go by the rule, by the law, not by sort of some kind of ideological, predisposition. So Călin Georgescu was kicked out. So in comes George Simion.
Is he better than Georgescu?
The thing with Călin Georgescu that is in a way both scary but better in a sense is that like Călin Georgescu has had a long career actually as a bureaucrat. He knows how to speak the language of, especially for a president, of like, other people in the world who run things. He's managed things. He's actually like been part of government business. George Simion has until 2020, he had no presence, no nothing, like no connection to politics, right? He started his party during COVID. It was an anti-COVID party. Romania had a absurdly harsh lockdown. Actually, was there right before the lockdown. I was on a sabbatical. It was supposed to be 6 months. It lasted 1 month because I realized the country's, closing down. I flew the last flight out of Romania and I was gone. But my friends who were there, especially elder people, suffered a great deal. And it was absurd. The cops were out on the streets, playing on megaphones, like, patriotic songs. It really felt like we were the communist period again.
Yeah.
So people were pissed, is basically the bottom line. Hour comes up. The guy got a big bus. Those big tour buses that like famous musicians travel in?
Okay. Yeah.
Enormous tour buses, right? Okay. Those puppies cost upward of, $500,000, some of them,
Wow.
if they're tripped up with everything, right? Also, gas mileage, it's like, 10 miles to the gallon at a time when gas is super expensive in Romania, right? So this guy got a tour bus that was painted with all the gold, because it's our gold, right? Kind of paraphernalia, and toured Romania for a whole year, going everywhere with that gas mileage to make himself known.
Where did
And I
he take
ask
the
you,
money?
where was he filling up his gas? You know how many Lukoil stations are in Romania?
I have no idea.
170. 170. That's more than almost any other gas company. I don't know if he was paying at Lukoil, if he was getting discounts, if somebody was on the phone saying, you serve this guy. But I have suspicions about it. That there's
How
no
does
way
his
this
like campaign finance accounting look like?
uh okay. He was verified. But there's also dark money. I mean, he might have learned how to do things correctly, and so he's not kicked out of the game. But I'm saying when he was building this you know organization, he didn't do it on his own. He didn't have the funds to start it. He was helped by somebody's. Um, his party is full of individuals. I mean, just basically the party is about the heteronormative family. Women's brains are not as good at doing analytical work as men's. They should stay at home and have babies who should be Christian, and no Roma need apply. That's the party.
And also, it's extremely anti-European Union. I think, like, at least
Yeah.
some was that Simonian, he said he's going to keep Romania in the EU and in NATO. However, Georgescu, who is his running mate pretty much, he said he's going to put him second in command, wants to leave the European Union, wants to leave NATO. And it's they believe that if they develop sort of their inside market, they're going to do much better than focusing on international trade, was my understanding of sort of some of their policies.
Yeah. It's a bunch of populist hoo-ha, basically, because there's no way that this can happen. Like Romania really needs investment from outside into Romania, right? Oh, the Romanian diaspora might become more interested in investing in Romania if they believe that Romania was a safe place to invest. Possibly. It's a nice goal. I don't deny that that's a nice goal. However, if the issue of corruption is an issue that you're not really touching, all you're saying, these are bad guys, and we're gonna, I mean, the language that both Călin Georgescu and George Simeon are using, yesterday, there was, a whole bunch of, a big video that Georgescu had, and then Simeon made some declarations. Um, all they want to do is take revenge on the people who disapproved of them. They have lists. The media is on the top of their list. People who do not correspond to the kind of socio-demographic thing that I just described are on their list. There's politicians. So this is where I'll say that these two individuals, they call themselves sovereignists, right? This is the anti-EU. Instead of saying anti-EU, they say sovereignists. They've learned to talk in positives, not negatives, right? Well, these sovereignists both insisted on traveling to Mar-a-Lago with a big MAGA hat on, to be anointed as the democratic people that, are going to come and save Romania, right? So much for sovereignty. The interesting thing, so this is just a little bit more side, but it's really quite important for the elections coming up, right? In November, after the first elections that I just described, and then the invalidation, when Trump arrived in the White House about a month later or even less, Romania was on the list of countries with a visa waiver. It's a huge accomplishment that people were hoping for a long time. There's a lot of diplomatic work that went into it by a lot of ambassadors. I know some of these people, really, basically decades worth of work, right? All of a sudden, Romania is off the list. And, initially, the official line in Romania was, no, it has nothing to do with the elections. They're just verifying that all the paperwork is in good standing. Well, here we are in May, still not on the list. And it's become clear that the taking Romania off the visa waiver is the only country that was taken off the visa waiver list was because Călin Georgescu did not win and he was not allowed to run again, right? So this is retribution from Trump directly to Romania, right? About 3 days ago, 4 days ago, I can't remember anymore, but just very recently, George Simeon went on social media and thanked Trump directly for taking Romania off the visa waiver to encourage Romanians to become more democratic.
Doesn't make any sense.
So,
What's the consensus in Romania? Are Romanians worried that the election results were canceled, or people are mostly happy and feel like that was the right thing to do?
I think there's very little trust in the current administration. I think there's very little trust in how politics are organized in Romania and the politicians who are at the top of the pile. So that generates basically a general fear of the future, like what's going to happen. People want to hear about security. They want to hear, words that are going to make sense to them. Because Simeon has not been involved in all these things, to some people, he seems like a guy who, really means business. But here's the thing that, to me, I didn't think was ever going to happen. During the first Trump administration, Trump was so popular in Romania. Like, compared to other post-communist countries or Europe in general, you go in Europe and people would just be, oh, what's up with Trump, right? You go to Romania and people are like, oh my God, that Donald, he is so awesome. We want to be Donald Trump. He's the best. Okay, well, fast forward. And I gotta tell you, I read the Romanian news every day. It's 180. There's no respectable politician, there's no respectable journalist who speaks about Donald Trump as if this guy's some kind of great leader, somebody to emulate, etc. So you have this weird phenomenon where you have the populists who clearly have grown kind of accustomed to a certain kind of rhetoric. It's both the fascist sort of old rhetoric, but also listening to what's happening in Hungary, in Poland, in Russia, in the United States, and taking, lessons from there. I mean, that I see that very clearly, right? Um, but they don't have the same kind of resonance. I mean, that statement about the visa waiver, right? Thanking Donald Trump for not, that backfired. It made strategically from a political perspective no sense, right? Like you're trying to ingratiate yourself with this dude, but you got to win the election first before you ingratiate yourself with Trump. So maybe thank him for that after you won, not before, right? So right now, the polls are mixed, but instead of it was more than a 15%, it was almost 20% difference between Nico Jordan and Georgia Simeon.
Mhm. Could you comment
It's much
about
narrower.
Nico Jordan? Right now, yeah, I think I have the numbers. So Don is at 45.2 support, and Simeon is 54.8. So it's coming much, much closer. But could you comment on who is sort of backing Nick Jordan? What are his positions, and what are your general opinions of his, I don't know, character integrity and what you think he would accomplish?
Right. So Nico Jordan comes as an independent, right? And I think that the reason he came in second is because he also appears as being anti-establishment, right? He is not part of any party, right? He's a younger guy, he's well educated, he speaks well, he's calm, he's a good candidate for certain populations, I would say, right? Who are those populations? Well, the urban educated population, first of all, right? He's mayor of Bucharest. Something like half of Romania's GDP is generated in Bucharest. So managing Bucharest means that you're actually prepared to scale that up, right? The complexity of working with business interests, political interests, cultural interests, etc., just the logistics of operating in Bucharest are tremendous. He's become known as somebody who is anti-corruption, but pro-business, right? So he is definitely center right. For instance, to go back to something that was a few years back, there was a referendum on redefining the family to be heteronormative. The only way that the referendum was going to pass was if more than 20% of the population voted. So the entire strategy there was don't go to vote. The referendum did not pass because of that, but we know that he was against the same-sex family kind of definition of the family because of the way he spoke then. He's now being depicted just recently, like the last couple of days, as being pro-gay and pro-bi and trans and all. There's no evidence of it. Like as I said, there's no left wing in Romania. Well, there are like small pockets, but not like a party that represents a lot of people. And so, to me, he's much more like of a typical liberal, actually, candidate in the traditional sense of liberal candidacy in liberal politics than anything else. He's staunchly pro-Europe. He sees what happened in 1989, especially with how bloody it was in Romania, as a kind of a sacrifice that means we actually owe those people something still 30 something years later. And we really have to hold on to this. This is our only chance to really move forward and to allow people with talent and with, business interests to flourish here. So that's the guy. He used to be affiliated with the union Save Romania, but they parted ways. He's had recently some serious conflicts with the leader of that party, but the USR party, the one that I was just talking about, they actually endorsed him as well. So he's the candidate of urban people, young people, the business interests, well, those that are not affiliated with Russia, I should say, because there's a lot of those interests as well. Yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. However, Romania is still something like 54% rural. That is the conundrum. When you have people who have been lied by, and I've done a study on this, in a little village outside of Hunedoara that had representatives from all the parties, right? Talk to people there, women, and they were like, no, these people say something, they do something else. We don't want to vote with any of these parties. So I can see how those individuals they don't live in Bucharest, they don't see what's going on there, right? They are likely to go with the other candidate who looks, sounds more like them, seems more like approachable, more on their level. None of these super educated, people, elites from Bucharest. It's down to the wire. I really don't know what to tell you. I have no predictions to make.
If George Simeon does win, what are the presidential powers? What are the parliamentary powers? And what would be I guess, from what I'm understanding, Parliament is not going to align with him. So how much sort of, I don't know, damage, for example, would he be able to do internally and externally?
So the president appoints the parliament, the government, and dissolves the government. He has made it very clear the day after he is elected, he's bringing Călin Georgescu into his team. And so he said that he would appoint Călin Georgescu as the prime minister. Now, a minority parliament, right, a minority government cannot really operate because you don't have the votes to get anything passed, right? So who knows what's going to happen then? I am somewhat afraid simply because when Călin Georgescu's candidacy was rejected by the Bureau of Elections that night, he and George Simeon called out their forces. A bunch of fascist boys came out and started kicking the crap out of the cops, destroying property, right? It wasn't a super big event, but it was just a small thing. I mean, the effect of an election and something as radical was what I just told you. If that happens, I can see a much bigger kind of situation, and I can see Putin being called in to help because that's their peeps, right?
Wow.
And Russia has helped Romania in the past a few times by taking, a third to a half of the size of the country away. So you got that going.
So do you believe through like Transnistria, they're going to send like actual troops into the country?
I don't think so. I think we're talking about military support in some other fashion. There's been drones that have flown into EU territory from the Soviet Union. Russia, I mean. I'm still with the Soviet Union in my head. So I think it's a really a crisis moment because of that. The other thing that we want to think about is not just the internal issue, right? Also, Dave Simeon, as I said, like yesterday, said he's going to take revenge on this list of people. They also have the Soros list, right? Of all the academics and all the, civil right society people. So, and because they clearly worship Trump, they have a playbook. They know how to do this. They've been shown. This is where internal and external politics, are all about sort of who leads the way and in what direction. The little guys who want to get the attention of the United States are very likely to act exactly like little Trumps, right? He'll find his Elon Musk and, it'll be all just going in that direction. Not to mention that there's been followers of fascism in Romania since the 20s until today.
Wanted to touch on that. So Georgescu, from what I understand, has been a supporter of the fascist movement called Iron Guard, which takes place in 1920s or so, I think.
Right. So you had the I'm sorry, I'm trying to think in Romanian. uh, you have the Legion of the Archangel Michael, which was the first legion fascist group that was from the 20s. From that group grew the Iron Guard and the Party All for the Country. These guys were basically persecuted by the communists when they came to power. Many of them left for other parts, like they ended up in Spain and Argentina, where other fascists also went, United States, France, etc. And some stayed underground. After 1989, there was a clear effort to rehabilitate the fascists. Continues. There were statues put up to fascists that are still up, even though there's legislation against that. There's been efforts to push back constantly, and people come back. There's been commemorations at the unmarked grave of the legionary leader of Romania, the fascist leader, every year since 1989. People very close to Georgescu have participated in those commemorations. They're illegal. Those people have not been prosecuted because the Romanian government has been lazy about that, but they've been doing this.
Wow.
Georgescu's son was trained in a paramilitary camp that's led by fascists. His wife is supportive of all that, and they have this blend, which is common with fascists in Europe and other places, the eco-fascists, right? Everything's organic. We have this in Bloomington, Indiana, right? Organic coffee by fascists, organic veggies by fascists, buy only from white people, help us. We are the great folks. I mean, I've experienced this right here in Bloomington. This is a culture that's been growing, that's been sort of underground, but not fully, that was allowed to exist because democracy, we have to be tolerant. And now, there's the fruits of that labor are becoming clear. A lot of these folks went into the French Legion, but also the Wagner Group, which I'm sure you know about.
Yes.
So the Central African Republic has had weirdly close relations with Romania since the 70s. Um, the president was married to a Romanian lady. I can't even explain how weird that is, but like that the Romanian president Ceausescu visited the Central African Republic in the 80s. It's like crazy, right? There's a record out, like music record, Ceausescu Bocasa. I mean, this was like a fun thing that we used to do in the 80s, dance to Ceausescu Bocasa. Anyway, the Wagner Group, which operates both there and other places, Congo and places in West Africa especially, has recruited Romanian mercenaries. These are people who have spent, some of them decades, training really well with the Russians, as we know, right? Making lots of money, acquiring weapons, and coming back to Romania with all these things to organize fascist paramilitary groups.
Listening to you, I feel like you have even a little bit of fear of some potential military takeover in the government or some type of military dictatorship.
Look, it's so one of the good things about Romania right now is that it has a large U.S. Supported base that has anti-missile launching capability in Cogalnicianu in the east of the country by the seaside. And with that, I feel like there's ways in which NATO can operate and react to whatever threat there is very fast. Like, to me, that is the one thing that makes me feel less troubled by what's happening. I should tell you that I will be traveling to Romania about 10 days after the second round of elections. And so it'll be interesting what welcome I have and if I can come back to this country. It might be our last conversation from Bloomington. I have no idea. Like, honestly, I feel like this is a little on the wild side here.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. And
Yeah.
especially not seeing it coming just 7 months ago, it was not something you'd probably even imagine.
No. The other thing that was really puzzling to me, and I think it is about some of the anti-globalist sentiment at the moment and a sense of like not being appreciated, is the diaspora. So there's, in this last round of election, something like almost 1 million people from the diaspora voted in the election.
Mhm. It
Romania
was
has a population of
overwhelmingly
19
diverse.
million.
Yeah.
This is an enormous percentage, right? Um, the percentage of people voting for the fascists from the diaspora, from Tampa, from West Palm Beach, where my parents live, from Germany, from Spain, from Sweden, from France, you feel me? Has been very large. These are people who are educated, who basically, as migrants to this country, you might be able to understand this probably better than a lot of other people, feel like they haven't been seen, they're not appreciated because you're white in a country where, racism is alive and there's a lot of critique of white nationalism. A lot of people who come from this area feel like, oh, but I'm a minority too. I work really hard to get here. What do you mean? I'm the oppressor. I mean, these are the conversations I'm having with my dad literally every day, right? Um, I sort of understand where he's coming from, but it's incredibly short-sighted because, you're not using your intelligence, your education, and your experience in the world to look at the facts. Like, who's qualified to be president? Just like basic qualification versus who's like, got no business like even going there, and so that's the thing that was the most puzzling to me, is this rejection of the middle of security and just jumping head first into this thing that, like, who knows what it's gonna be, don't look very good.
Yeah. I wanted to examine more of the reasons and maybe like given Romanian history to understand how these movements come to be. And I think as a lot of sort of parties that have been in place across Europe and the United States are trying to redefine themselves to
Mhm.
be stronger against the threat of extreme right-wing populism, what exactly happened? And maybe, for example, we could start with the anti-immigrant rhetoric. I found it extremely interesting that took root in Romania, where we have 3.2% of foreign-born population, like being in Romania. So it's almost non-existent there. What do you think? Where does that come from? Especially that it's almost sort of this made-up fear.
It certainly comes from the media that's itself populist, that had found basically talking about people of color, as the other, and as our enemy, as a kind of a red herring, that, a way to whip up a kind of a sentiment of togetherness, even as you're angry and you're feeling like you're not being seen or listened to, right? That this is a good object to focus on, your anger, because these are the people that are taking, your money, your jobs, your wife. I've had bizarre conversations with Uber drivers or taxi drivers around Bucharest. So there is a growing population of Sri Lankan and Nepalese, primarily men, who are basically kind of in their 20s and 30s, right? These are folks who come in and they live in indescribable conditions. It's just not good at all. Do work no Romanian wants to do, the dash DoorDash, delivery, kind of food delivery stuff, or they work in kitchens, like places where they're not seen because they're men of color, right? And I'm hearing from these people, oh yeah, these guys, yeah, they're here, they're really here, they're on the streets, they walk together, they want to really, they're after our women. They really want to get our women and to get our jobs. And I'm thinking, dude, the people you're talking about make less money than you do, live in really, really awful conditions. don't have time to even sleep, much less like, what is leisure time? They don't have leisure time, right? If there's any leisure, they go to the spots where other Nepalese or Sri Lankan guys mostly, hang out, and they either watch soccer or some other kind of sports, or they break bread together. They have food together that they've made because now they can actually cook their own food because there's a few places where you can buy those supplies, right? Like that's all that's happening with these folks. This sort of looking at somebody who's not white, of course, has deep roots in Romania. And in Romania in particular, it has to do with the Roma population. So anti-Roma racism has existed in Romania for about 600 years. It's really hard to get rid of that sentiment if you never confront it. That is the bottom line. So just to give you a few kind of insights into that, right? So Romania, nobility in Romania, the state, as well as the Romanian Orthodox Church, enslaved Roma folks for about 550 years. The Romanian Orthodox Church was the largest owner of humans in Romania. Never been acknowledged. Nothing. There was no recognition. There was no place, no moment, no site, no little plaque that says this monastery was built with the work of enslaved people. There's documentation about a lot of this, right? So you have that. The Orthodox Church has made itself the essential religious kind of authority in Romania. It's basically state religion, more or less. Not officially, but it is, right? And it cannot be questioned in certain areas, right? So if you have a racist church that is supporting the state, history textbooks, the only time that they bring up the Roma are to talk about poverty and lack of education, not the sources of the poverty and lack of education, and to touch on the Holocaust very, very kind of lightly, that there were people who were deported. But even when they talk about the deportations during the Holocaust of the Roma people, they will add, and only criminals were deported, right? You dig below the surface of what criminal means, and you arrive at eugenicist laws that define people who are sex workers as being degenerate and criminals that need to be stamped out, right? Or somebody who did, who was a truant, who, people who are not with a set location, right? Okay, well, if you're a really poor person who's never been given the chance to be educated and have a job and be integrated, where are you going to live? So this criminality that the Romanian state, then implemented. Oh, by the way, sex workers and truants who were ethnically Romanian were not deported. These things are not like, I'm sick of talking about this because I've been talking about it for 30 years. I have other colleagues who talk about this all the time. We've published so much. I've published at this point several works on eugenics in Romania that talk to this. I'm about to publish another book on, disability and eugenics and to point towards these racist issues, right? Okay. Is this stuff integrated in the textbook? Do kids in Romania know about this? No, unless they take interest in this, right? So the issue is that first you have racism against people that you've discriminated against forever and never given a chance to, right? When those people start becoming outspoken and they start pointing out to this, you start feeling bad because, well, I didn't do this. I didn't own any slaves. We know that discourse, right? But somehow, so it's not my job. I don't have to care about this, right? But at the same time, there's no kind of reaching out or empathy. The Social Democratic Party is the only party in Romania that actually reached out to Roma communities. And that's what I mean, like, it's mixed things with the Social Democrats, right? To help folks, right? But again, in a populist way, not in a way that actually brings education, safety, the ability to flourish for people. It's like giving them little trinkets here and there so they keep voting for the Social Democrats. Um, and so that racism then it's taken because it's already part of the mainstream, right? Ignorance and racism. And you say, those Afghanis, yeah. And the Syrians, yeah. All right. And those Nepalese guys and the Sri Lanka, they're just like the Roma. So we know what the script is.
Just for context, I've been in Romania in February 2024. I was just in Bucharest, but I have not seen a single person who was like a non-white person over like 7 days that I spent there. So, like, I guess
You were downtown, weren't you?
I was by the old city.
Yeah. No, you're
But
not going to see a lot of people who are not white there. Well, that's the richest part of Bucharest. It's the most expensive part of Bucharest. I lived there last time that I was in Bucharest. I mean, you have to know where to go to see this other Romania. There are people of
if you
color
go
in a
to
lot of.
Germany or
Oh
or
yeah, up.
France or anywhere where
Yeah,
people have this discourse, you would
yeah,
sort of, okay, yeah, this country has immigrants. When I
yeah.
was in Romania, though, in like these limited areas, I have not like seen it at all. So that was a surprising thing for me to see when I saw there was such a popular talking point during the elections.
The other one is anti-Semitism, right? So Romania has very few Jews left because they were either killed or they left or they were sold to Israel. Long story.
Sold
Uh,
with
yeah, the Communist Party in Romania sold Germans to the German Federal Republic and Jews to Israel. This is how we made foreign currencies. So Ceausescu decided for, every Jew that Israel took on, they have to pay, I forget what the amount, it wasn't a lot, like
So you weren't
3,000.
allowed to leave if you were Jewish just on your own until somebody paid for you, or?
Well, the Israeli government committed itself. So the way it worked, the negotiation happened between the governments, and the Israeli government said, look, we will pay for the resettlement of these individuals. We'll take them in, and we're also, because the Romanian government is losing and resources, we're going to pay for each person that leaves. So they sold Jews to Israel, and they sold Germans to Germany. Yeah, equal opportunity. Anywho, there's very few Jews left in Romania, right? Most of the synagogues are closed. I mean, like there's one synagogue that operates, and it was very close to where I lived last time that I was in Romania. I would go by on Saturday just to see, like, not a lot of people. There's like, 10 people going to synagogue in Bucharest, which used to have, I think at least 50,000 Jews before 1957, right? There are some Israeli citizens coming back or their kids, but it's a small group, right? Okay, well, that doesn't mean that you're not going to talk about the Shorosh, lists, which is always a wink wink to, the great Jew that is, taking over the country. And that, there's these business interests, wink wink, nudge nudge, that are, about sort of Israeli things and Jewish things in Romania. It's a strange phenomenon because it's really a tiny minority of people at this point, right? But very much oversized, outsized in terms of the discursive prominence of the so-called Jewish threat that people talk about in variety of ways, like the fascists, who are very much about that as well.
Would I be socially penalized for going on a national TV and out loud saying that there's like a Jewish threat that exists in Romania, or is that okay to
There's
say?
a good Jewish what?
A threat that there's a Jewish,
Oh,
would I be penalized
penalized in Romania that there's a Jewish threat? No,
if okay.
no, no, no. So there is an institution that receives complaints about these kinds of verbal attacks. I don't think anything would happen. If somebody lodged a complaint, I can imagine, a member of the Jewish committee lodging a complaint about this. But they would find nothing wrong with it. I'm sure. Like I could almost promise. Not that I'm encouraging it by any means, but
No,
you
I
don't get
wasn't planning.
right. No, the point is, yes, you do not get punished for saying those kinds of things. Yeah.
I think another part that I think actually is another, I don't know, example of why these populist right-wing movements are rising that I actually think is like sort of a fair reason that's very important to tackle is the growing income inequality. And I think it's especially prominent. Rural areas in Romania are very much impoverished, and also either they're not interested in politics as much, either they don't have the tools to really understand the complicated political structures, or they're just working so much they don't have time to figure it out. But in Romania, from what I understand, people outside of the big cities live quite poorly, and they have been overwhelmingly the biggest supporters of Georgescu and Simonian.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, it's very close to what you're describing. I would add one other element that I think is really important, and it's made a difference in different parts of rural Romania, which is migration, labor migration. A lot of Romanians, and not necessarily like super well educated, working class folks, drivers, butchers, like folks who work with their hands, right? Have gone overseas in the EU and are working and bringing money back. So you really see villages where, say, 10 people left and came back in a small village that can really transform the culture there. Why? Those people have children. The children sometimes stay in Romania, sometimes go with the parents there, depending on what the parents' situation is there, right? And they get educated in other places. The kids come back, with their phones, with their, knowing German or Spanish or English or whatever. And all of a sudden, I saw this with my kids, when my kids were traveling to this one village that we stayed, they could talk to everybody there, like anybody who was under the age of 18. No problem. Everybody spoke English. They're all conversant. They have the same topics. They have the same popular cultural references, right? So that is also possible. When people go overseas, they come back with income. They come back with certain kinds of, expectations about logistics. Like there will be running water, right? Not in every village, right? We are going to have paved roads. Not in every village, right? So some of that has transformed, right? It's becoming more uneven, and the kind of inequality you're talking about is also between regions and between villages. So, for instance, in parts of Transylvania, there's enormous wealth in the country. Enormous. It's people would have like a second home or a third home, vacation home. They leave some relative there, some older lady who's going to take care of the house, and they come back. And in other words, that's a completely different landscape than like you go to the fields every day and you work the fields, right? That's not so much happening, right? But there are other parts, even in Transylvania, but especially in Moldova, northern part of Romania, northeast part of Romania, and especially in the southern part, Oltenia, just dire poverty. Nobody's invested, nobody's left. Everybody's stuck in like 35, 40 years ago. These are also places. So that's the thing, is like these are places that vote for Georgescu. You're right about that. Um, but it's a kind of desperation going on there. It's not like anything's gonna happen in a different direction. And I don't see anything like from Nicu Jordan that's gonna appeal to these people whatsoever, right? What's gonna change things for these villages? I have no idea. I have no idea. One of the things that has been a kind of a ongoing leitmotif in Romania is that it's a country that, because it's got so much variety of sort of landscapes and things to do in terms of tourism, that agro-tourism would be the best investment for like small businesses, right? The idea of becoming a place where you come and relax and you let somebody else take care of you, this and that. A lot of good ideas. I've seen a lot of good ideas, but not a lot of success. There's competition
So just go to like a small random village in Romania for like to
for
stay on a
vacation.
farm, or
For vacation, yes, to be taken care of, to have
maybe like
somebody.
a lake or a mountain for that, or like
Well, there's quite a lot of mountains, there's quite a lot of creeks, there's quite a lot. There is beauty in a lot of places, right? Not every place that I'm thinking of is like great, but there's possibilities. It's also like, cool little historical sites here and there, a monastery, a this and that. The issue is roads are insufficient and they're quite bad. So while getting anywhere, you kind of lose hope. The trains that are supposed to be running well are never on time. That's a problem, right? And the highways that were supposed to be finished maybe 15 years ago are still under construction and some. And in Moldova, going up to Ukraine, mess. Um, you really can't have, can invite people in without providing the opportunity for them to get there without being annoyed and tired and ready to go home by the time they arrived. That's the issue. There's, for instance, so this is a cool thing that was launched about 15 years ago called Via Transilvanica. And it basically crosses the Romanian landscape from the Iron Gates on the Danube up to Ukraine, towards I think Sighetul Marmației, which is right on the Ukrainian border, right? And it goes especially the Carpathians, right? It's supposed to be like the Camino Real from Spain, right? So like there's a the place that everybody goes hiking to. A lot of folks in Romania have gone to it. They really liked it, and they're trying to kind of replicate that vibe over here. Um, it's a project. It's a project. It's ongoing. Romanians can buy a mile and like fund the building of, the pathway and signage and maintenance for like 1 mile of it, kilometer actually. And so it's an ongoing thing. I'd like to try it out. I haven't really, seen it. So some of that is happening. But it's not what's going to solve the issue. I mean, this issue of the debt is really huge. Bottom line is the European Union has provided Romania with enormous resources to try to deal with agritourism, investment, of all sorts of kinds in Romania, small business support, etc. Romania has had to return EU money unspent. This is the level of competence.
So they just didn't want to bother with it.
Well, they either were not in compliance with what they were supposed to be doing, so then the money was pulled out. Or in certain cases, it was a political issue where, Romania was being pushed to go in a particular direction by the EU or lose funding. And because for that, the Romanians, the political cost was too high due to their populism. It was a queer issue. They lost a bunch of EU money, right? This is a problem of Romania's making. It's not like somebody else created it. It's shocking to me, right? All the educated people in Romania with competence, with desire, with ambition that could be, funneling money and building something. Why is that not happening? A lot of it has to do with the corruption at the local level, right? If you're not part of those people that are anointed already, your chances of getting a contract done are almost zero. The lawyers, if you don't have the right lawyers, zero chances. It's a big onion. Got to keep peeling at it.
What is Romania's, I guess, development of the relationship between Romania and the EU? I think Romania became part of the EU in 2007. Very recently, they became part of the Schengen zone,
Yes.
which was a huge victory, and people wanted that a lot. But yeah, if you could share a little bit more about that entire development, and also where is all of that growing frustration comes from that sort of fueled this new political movement?
Yeah. So Romania was slower to get on the road towards neoliberal privatization than Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, right? So that's that. I would say just in a few words, that's the difference. I mean, this has been documented pretty well. In Romania, one of the things that's been a serious issue is that due to the fact that the secret police was so large and in such tight relationship with the Communist Party, people who were within that community had access to information and to capital to become the first investors in Romania, which means Laws were designed to be corrupted from the beginning. Investment was available to people because of being able to buy influence via intelligence. That's still going on. Romania has something like 5 intelligence institutions right now.
Oh,
So,
wow.
like every party, yeah, imagine the budget on that one. Every party has their own, you know, there's a lot of spying on each other and a lot of undercutting of competitors via this kind of thing, right? So that is what held Romania back to a great extent. That and lack of interest in Romania. It's not just Romania. It's also that they didn't have the Polish diaspora. They didn't have the Hungarian diaspora, right? They didn't have Václav Havel as their president.
To advocate
To
for.
advocate, to be known, to be kind of elevated to a level of visibility where, there's outsiders who are, yes, who are your supporters, right? So in 2007, it was a huge thing, but 2007 happened right before the 2008 recession, global recession. Romania has never been able to take advantage of the EU in the way that the previous joiners, right, the ones that joined just a few years earlier, because the kind of capital of accumulation, the kind of investment that happened in those just a few years before 2008 for the Visegrad countries, right, for Croatia, which were the first ones to go in, never happened in Romania, right? So, it's been kind of a dragging situation. The internal corruption, the underinvestment in Romania have never really elevated to that level. And then you take the recession. What happened in Syria a few years later during the war and the huge influx of refugees, not in Romania, right? We know they didn't come to Romania. They went to Greece, they went to Bulgaria, they went to Hungary, not to Romania. I mean, very few. But this notion that, we just got into the EU and where are the dividends? What's happening? Who's winning? Who was winning were the people that were already very mobile, right? The younger techie generation who, were working for transnational corporations. You had the big corporations coming in, sweeping in, hiring these like small number of individuals to also become very mobile in terms of moving through the EU. So they are
There was no
happy about it.
spillover effect for the majority of the
And
population.
most of the population were not benefiting. They're just seeing all this wealth accumulated and a lot more on media about all this wealth being accumulated. That's how resentment happens, right? Uh, when they started going to the EU and working, as I was saying, as migrants, that really shifted. I was hoping long term that it would shift the culture, the political culture, towards understanding that democracy doesn't happen overnight, that there's no guarantees in a democratic election, that things are going to go your way. And that the only thing that you can think in a democracy is, I lost this time, I got to do better next time. In the meantime, I got to work within what there is, right? So this notion of accepting the rule of law as a fundamental kind of framework for stability, for well-being, for welfare, for money making, for all these things, right? That has never really become situated in Romania as like a real value, unfortunately, except for a smaller group of individuals, those who have gone back and forth. But even there, right? Think about what's happened since 2008, right? There's been so much chaotic swinging, transnational corporations coming in, the IMF, the European Bank of Development, cutting welfare measures left and right in all the EU countries, right? Unemployment for women in Greece was like 20 something percent in 2008. Romania was pretty high. The post-communist countries, they're the kind of, sort of cutting back and living very sparsely was imposed. People knew how to do it, but they're resentful.
Yeah.
They didn't have an explanation at that point. They were kind of bamboozled, I would say, right? And so on the heels of that, new political movements, some of which were not political but religious, that's another big part. Evangelical groups coming into Eastern Europe from all sorts of places have really changed the culture of those places in terms of what people ally with, what they think of the state, how they understand the law, right? So if you have an evangelical group who keeps saying every single day that this state is a corrupt state because abortion is legal, after a generation and a half, the rule of law doesn't seem such a great thing to you anymore because it's the devil's work. Yeah.
How religious is Romania?
Apparently, on paper, very religious. What that means? A lot more people get married in the Orthodox Church and baptize their children in the Orthodox Church. You know how it is with the Orthodox Church, right? You attended Easter, the end. Yeah. Uh, in the countryside, religiousness is very strong. It's very strong. Not every priest is super conservative, politically and religiously, or radical right wing, I should say. Conservative is not even the word anymore. But these are not places that provide a great deal of education in terms of understanding the challenges of the world around you, right? They provide maybe some, sort of emotional relief from desperation, but they're not really taking you towards anything that in this world you're going to be able to understand and better be equipped to deal with. That's the problem with the religiousness in Romania right now. There's a lot of people wearing crosses. A lot of people wearing crosses. That's about all I can say about that.
Okay. How about Russia? What has the relationship been with Russia on the Romanian, like how do people perceive it? How does the government perceives Russia and
It's
how has it
really so people, the government, they're two different things. Historically, currently, it's a long story. I'll start with saying that I'm half Russian. My mother's from Moscow, so I'm a Masha at home. And so I have experienced Romanians' way of dealing with Russians since day one. Um, I never used my diminutive name Masha ever in Romania, in public, only with the family. Because when I tried to, I got weird stares. People didn't want to talk to me. So being Russian in Romania in the 1970s was not a great thing. And that has to do with the long history of Romanian-Russian relations, right? So Russia, Imperial Russia, and more recently Soviet Russia attacked Romanian principalities in Romania afterwards, numerous occasions, captured territory, people, treated people badly, etc., etc. There's no reason for Romanians to have any trust in the Russians because of these repeated. When I say Russians, I mean the Russian state. These imperialistic desires and designs on the Romanians. That's been demonstrated over and over again. So this is not like a secret or a small thing. It's a huge Romanian history thing. And it's learned in school all the time, which is why people were looking at me like I was the enemy when I was in school and I, might utter the word Masha. Oh my God. My middle name is Doina, which is like the super Romanian name that my grandmother gave me to make sure that it couldn't be changed to some other name. There's no like Russian version of that. So that's nationalism for you. So the anti-Russian thing, is very strong. The way in which the early Soviet regime treated Romania and how collectivization happened with the support of the Soviets also made a lot of waves in the countryside. And so you would expect, first of all, that yes, the countryside would be against anything Russian. Enter the Orthodox Church. As we know very well, Vladimir Putin, our KGB officer, is a very smart guy when it comes to, he's a very smart guy when it comes to understanding the power of the church, right? And when he became president, there's that moment when Kirill comes and blesses him. And all of a sudden, the Soviet, officer becomes a Russian, emperor, basically. That transformation, which has continued to be amplified, right? And the role of the Orthodox Church, especially in the last 20 years, since 2008, I would say, in transnational evangelizing, right, work being done, has had a huge impact. It was a huge impact, right? So some Romanians look at the Russians as Orthodox brothers, not as the imperial occupier anymore. I don't understand. Like, in some way, I want to say maybe some force of resentment finally end. Like, okay, the Russians are there, we're over here, so maybe some of that resentment is going away and it's being replaced by something that's more positive. But they're in the middle of a war in which you have, in the name of orthodoxy, occupying another Orthodox state. I don't know. And the thing is, Ukraine's on the news all the time in Romania. Every day there's something about something that's happening in Ukraine, right? The problem there, this is a very short kind of term thing that happened, but since the beginning of the war, so Romania was not a big place where a lot of refugees from Ukraine stayed. There's a lot of kind of coming through, going to Slovakia, to Hungary, eventually to Germany, to Poland. A lot of people went to Poland. But some Ukrainians stayed. Right after the beginning of the war, there were groups everywhere. Everybody wanted to host a refugee. It was just this like flourishing of, oh, our sisters from Kiev, yes, blah, blah, blah. A year later, nobody wanted to talk about the Ukrainians anymore. At this point, all that people in Romania think about is Ukraine's a failed state. The Ukrainian mafia has moved from Kiev to Romania, and they're buying all our properties, and they're taking over with their, economic power, this and that. Again, this weird red herring happening, right? And in the meantime, there's still refugees that are very poor, Ukrainian mothers with children in Bucharest, where I lived in 2023 in the spring, was 2 minutes away from a school where basically it's downtown Bucharest. It's very close to where you are, but on the other side of the track, so to speak, right? So in an area that is now populated by a lot of Roma families. Because of that, none of the white people are taking their kids to that school. Guess who's there with the Roma kids? All the Ukrainian kids. So I would go to work in the morning and I would see the moms, like Ukrainian and Roma moms, dropping their kids off, and I'd be coming back from work, and all the Ukrainian kids are by themselves in the yard playing, waiting for their moms to come back from work with nothing else to do, with nobody around them, nobody to care for them. It was shocking. I'll be honest. The lack of humanity, the lack of care for this. So when Georgia Simeon talks about, we don't care about Ukraine, we're not going to participate, and this is not our war, people hear him. People hear him in the way that he is talking to them, right? And so the anti-Russian thing has now morphed into this, we don't want to deal with this mess. It's not our mess. Like this notion that, first of all, these are human beings. Two, just self-interest. Like, there's no reason to believe that if Putin wins now, right, and the war is over, and he's got a respite there, that he's not going to turn around, go to Transnistria, and try to take over Moldova. We know that's already like in the plans.
Yeah.
And that's next door. So they're
And I
going to
wanted
stop
to
there.
ask about it. I imagine big part of Romanians almost view Moldova as their lost territory.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. If you're Moldovan, you automatically can get Romanian citizenship if you want to. So it's state policy, basically, at this point. It's kind of funny because it's like, the poor cousins. Moldovans have a dialect that has a lot of Russian in it, and a lot of words like 19th century words that are not used in current Romanian anymore. So if somebody comes and talks to you from Moldova, they sound like there's, some old grandmother from like the top of the mountain who just came down and it's talking to you. So there's a weird kind of class, so this kind of relationship with the Moldovans, a lot of Moldovans. Yeah.
If we zoom out as a historian, what would you think your sort of bird eye view on the trajectory of Romania, sort of how, I guess, post 1989 revolution, how the country's been developing, and what are some positives and what are some things that could have been done better?
Thank you for that question. It's a nice way to kind of round up, right? Um, Look, the fact that even though they are corrupt, you have now a large number of parties that have developed in the country. I'll just start with that. There is a political culture that has possibilities, right? The Romanian constitution is the most democratic Romanian constitution that ever existed since the founding of Romania. It works. Like, Călin Georgescu was not allowed to run for president again because this place actually works. Even though Romania has a large debt, the rate of growth of income of the population as an average is higher than the EU. Something good is happening. Education. There's opportunities for education and for creativity and for growth and for living life on your own terms like there never was before. I'll give you one example, gender parity with regard to economic power is the closest now in Romania than it's ever been, and it's higher than the European average.
Wow.
So, I mean, we can point out all sorts of problems, but there's all these things also, right? There's, in terms of IT, there are incredibly interesting, smart things going on that I don't even fully understand. And a lot of people who are both like working in Romania and going overseas. Oh, travel, living overseas, that huge diaspora I was talking about, that's a positive as far as I'm concerned. I mean, people can talk about it in all sorts of ways, but it's like you're enriching what it means to be this thing. You are expanding and connecting with a lot more places around the world and bringing that beauty, that curiosity, and that complexity back home, right? You're making this place more relevant because geostrategically where it is and the kind of growth that it's itself producing, right? So these are to me all just like they're not fancy things, but they are the bread and butter of a society, I think, I can tell you there's like, Sibiu has like a cultural festival every weekend of the summer. That never happened before, right? Film festivals like nobody's business, jazz festivals. I never heard of anything like that before 1989 to the extent that they're now. The film industry, wonderful, creative, not particularly well supported by the government, but boy, are there some talented people going on, in that area. Yeah, I could go on and on. The music, I mean, I come from music. I'm a violinist. A bunch of my friends are, in all the orchestras all over the world playing now because okay, so that's not from 1989 onward, but it hasn't been discouraged since then. and there is more gender parity also there. So there's positive things that that you can have because of the EU. Same-sex marriage that has been legalized in other places is recognized in Romania. Even in that area, a tiny little bit of like, it's a little bit better than it used to be, right? Tons of super smart people who are trained in legal things are starting to do more and more work in terms of advocacy for underrepresented folks. I mean, some of this is still in the start. For disability issues, it's not much, but it's more than there was. So I could go on and on with these kinds of examples. I love the place. I think it has a lot of beauty. It can be very interesting to visit and to spend time there. People are very friendly, and yeah.
Nice. Okay, one last question. If you wanted to recommend a book that would allow people to learn more about any part of Romanian society, politics, culture, history that
Boy,
you'd like to
all
recommend.
right. There is there's one book. I kind of hard to say one book. in English, right? You're trying to get oh, well, so National Myth and History by Lucian Boia, which was published maybe 15 years ago, continues to be a good way to get into kind of understanding how nationalism has shaped thinking about being Romanian and Romanian society and how it works. I think that would be a good one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to seeing what comes of this.